Well, let's be honest. We all love to find a ready-made player in Football Manager that needs absolutely no work whatsoever to improve. A signing that we can add to the first team, throw straight in, and never worry about again. For most of us though, this is very unlikely to be a possible reality. When struggling in the lower leagues with restricted budgets, or even just with younger players that need developing to reach their potential, training becomes paramount. With that in mind, today I'm going to focus on a general guide to individual training in FM26. I'll outline the various aspects of it that can be used, as well as the different ways you can use it to help players at different stages of their career. If you like the sound of that, then please do add a thumbs up on the video and check out all my other step-by-step FM26 guides so far up in the playlist in the eye above. Before we discuss the 5 key ways you could use individual training to help your players though, let's very first quickly cover what individual training is, how to find it in FM26 in the new layout of the game, and go through the different available elements within it. In very simple terms, individual training is exactly what you'd expect it to be from the name. It's a specialised, dedicated, one-on-one training plan between one of your players and a member or more of your coaching staff. In Football Manager, this can be used to help players improve specific attributes or aspects of their game, as well as encouraging them to adapt to specific parts of your tactical setup too. If used correctly, especially with players that have a positive personality, individual training can actually have a profound impact on the technical, physical, and tactical progression of your squad. We're going to head over to FM26 to see how you reach the screen, and I will apologise at this point, as I always do, for the fact that I've got several notes to make sure I don't miss anything, and my eyes will dot around the screen, but you have to forgive me for that. So we've come back to this Newcastle United squad, which we've used for the setup of pretty much every guide so far, and we're going to show you the first of 2 ways you can get to individual training. Now, the first one is fairly obvious. You just click on a player you want, so let's pick our favourite in these guides, which is Lewis Miley, and you can click the training tab at the bottom, and you'll be taken to their individual training screen here. From this point, we can set up as we want to. There is another way to get to this screen more generically as well. If you go to the squad, let's just start from the overview of the squad here, and you go to the training section, which you can access both here from the drop down or here from the tile. Once you click on this, you've also got the option for individual training, and the bottom left hand side of the tile will take you to exactly the same screen, but without having a player highlighted first. That is literally the only difference between the two. For the purposes of this demonstration though, let's just highlight one of our players, and we'll pick Lewis Miley again here, because within a player's individual training page, you can now see the options that you can work on. So here we have 3 specific areas you can choose to work on in FM26, as well as another selection option for intensity. The main reason for this increase, it used to be 2 areas you could focus on, is due to the introduction of the new in and out of possession tactics, which essentially splits the position and role training into 2, as you can see. Now that of course means that the first 2 of our 3 individual training options are tactically focused, allowing us to work on a player's position both in and out of possession to fit within our tactical setup or a specific role we want them to learn. Now we'll discuss the many potential benefits of that later on, but of course at the moment we're just giving an overview of what it is, whereas the individual training focus is the 3rd option, and this is a little bit different because this gives us a chance to complete additional work on a specific group of technical or physical attributes for a player, as well as some that loosely overlap with the mental side of the game. The word additional is pretty key here as well, when we're talking alongside the final menu option, which is training intensity and about extra training overall. Because that little drop down menu there, while meaning very little on its own, actually serves as our first warning. Because as we go through this guide, we need to remember that the more elements or intensity that we add to a player's individual, general, or other training plans, the more likely they are to become overworked, fatigued, or even potentially injured too. This is why it's essential that we balance development carefully and don't try to do too much too soon or at once. So now we know where individual training is, what it can be used for, and even the potential risks of it, let's discuss 5 ways that we could use this to apply to our squad and help our players and team out. So now we know where individual training is, how it can be found and what it can be used for in FM26, as well as a potential pitfall, let's discuss 5 key ways that we can apply this to our first team squad and maybe help our players of now and the future. So the first important use of individual training is during a player's development. This is a step that will usually apply to players that have either arrived through your youth intake or signed in their teenage years, or might even be a late bloomer with plenty of potential still to grow into, if you trust your assistant reports, that is. We've covered this topic in pretty large detail in our recent FM26 Youth Development Guide, which is up there, as the two areas do overlap significantly. So I'll keep the information a bit more general here and try to apply it specifically to individual training rather than just youth development. Having said all of that, I do think it's fairly obvious to suggest that when you sign or are developing a younger player, you normally have more potential to work with. The current ability is often a lot lower than the potential ability, and therefore you have a greater opportunity to both shape and mould them before they reach their peak ability. This is why individual training is so crucial for talented young players at your club. It provides an opportunity to create a first team start without the costs of a big transfer, the continuous trawling of scout reports to find a ready-made signing, or even the inconvenience of finding people that don't quite fit with your team's tactical setup. It also gives us a chance to help a player adapt to specific roles in our tactic and iron out any flaws in their game, often before they reach first team level if you're doing this for young players. This means that the player will be primed and ready to play for our club within our tactic, the right position, the right role for our setup as soon as they're there and ready, rather than having to teach a new first team signing while they're on the job, which is a possibility too, but obviously means you might have some decline in performances in a short term. A huge benefit to tactical familiarity, the all-important club dynamics, and probably even the average match rating of the player too. There are a lot of benefits that could be had here. In terms of setup, as we've sort of discussed in some of the other guides, I would recommend utilising the different elements of individual training at different stages, as this will maximise development, which we've covered in great detail previously, but also reduce the risk of injuries and overworking a player. Don't forget, often if they're in development sides, you might be promoting them for the odd first team appearance. They're also potentially playing in youth teams, development games, and training in a really intense way as well. So if you add on too much here and try and get them to do 3 individual things and more general training work too, as well as being perhaps in a mentoring group where they're working with people on the mental side of the game, you could risk just burning them out very early. And that's the last thing we want with top talents. As advised in the Youth Development Guide, we generally want to focus on general development in the youth team years, sort of 15 to 18 or 19, and in specific tactical development in the latter stages from maybe 18 or 19 to 21, 22. Again, that's just a general guide. You will have players who are later developers that you're maybe signing on a free or a cheap transfer a bit later on. Some players you can't bring in till certain ages, where you have to adapt this plan slightly and make a judgment. Let's give a quick example of how to set this up in FM26 before we discuss some of the thinking behind our chosen options in the next 2 points of this guide. So again, we're back with Lewis Miley, and at this stage I'm not going to discuss why I'm picking the options I am, I'm just showing you how to set them up, and we'll discuss the potential benefits of it in some of the other points later on. So here with Lewis Miley, once we've got our individual training screen up, which we showed you how to get to earlier, we're going to set an in possession role, and although he's a centre midfielder, I'm going to pick defensive midfield and a deep line playmaker, which again we'll discuss in a bit. And out of possession, I'm going to set a defensive midfielder who's screening, which again, we'll cover in a moment. For individual training, no real weaknesses in Miley's game, no exceptional strengths, but given what I'm going to be working on for the future and the type of player I want him to be, and given where he's playing at the moment, I'm going to get him to work on endurance to try and bring that stamina up because, look, Newcastle are in a Champions League, they're going to be playing every 3 days. They need players who are going to be able to play twice a week, and at the moment, Miley might not be able to do that, so we're going to work him on endurance. So now we've discussed the many ways in which it can be beneficial to youth development to utilise individual training, and we've shown how to set it up quickly. But let's move on to our second point now and start to get into the nitty-gritty of why these decisions can be so important and how they can be helpful and how to decide what to choose. Because our second point, again, links to something we mentioned in the early stages of our youth development guide, and we just showed a moment ago. It's equally important for new young signings too, which is something you're going to encounter a lot over the course of a career. And I'm talking, of course, about ironing out weaknesses as soon as possible from a player's game. If a player comes through your academy, a new signing arrives, or even if you're deciding whether to follow up on a scout report, the impact of individual training could be a decision maker here for you. If you find a player that's brilliant, suits their position in every way except from one major attribute flaw, consider whether a training plan could actually be a solution here rather than just giving up on the signing altogether. Let's go over to FM and have a look at what I mean. So let's take a couple of examples where this information might be pertinent, and we'll focus this time on before we sign a player in something that could help us make a decision. So I've gone to the list of recommended players from our scout reports, and I'm thinking about positions. Say, let's pick a fullback and a centre forward. Now, most people who are regulars on this channel will know, I adore positioning in defenders. Good positioning is the most important attribute for me. And most of us would also want strikers that can finish, if you want to use a very common attribute, midfielders that have a good engine if you're at the lower levels, have a good natural fitness and stamina. If a young player is excellent at everything else in their role, except from those single attributes, we have to discuss whether it's going to be a deal breaker, or alternatively, if it's something we can fix. If you find one of these players in your scout report, which we're going to show an example of, and you're contemplating signing them, why not check if the attribute can be worked on in individual training first? Because not all of them can, but it might provide the answer for you. If you see that it can, and you see that the player also still has potential to grow into, which will normally be indicated from your scout reports, then this could be a solution to your problem and save you paying more money for a ready-made player now or in the future. So the example I'm going to use here is Malo Gusto. I'm looking for a right back to come to Newcastle. Kieran Trippier's in the last year. He's going to be moving on. We need to get somebody in. And Malo Gusto has popped up as an A recommendation signing. But there's a disaster because while he's very good going forward and he's not got terrible defensive attributes, his clear weakness defensively is that mighty positioning one. Now 11 is just not going to cut it at the top level for me, because I am a sucker for a defender with good positioning, and Malo Gusto has not got it. Now, is that going to be a deal breaker at 22? Well, he's a little bit older in his development, so we're going to need to check our scout report and see how much potential he's got to grow into. Something that was discussed a lot from the youth development guide, and maybe a bit of a misconception from people. There is no cap on individual attributes, but there is a general potential and current ability range that these players are at. And as you can see, Malo Gusto, according to my scouts at least, if we trust them, has another star of potential ability to grow into. And based on the fact that they're saying it would take him from decent Premier League level to a leading Premier League player, you would imagine that's quite a big bit of room for development he's got. So hopefully in the future, we can bring him in and he'll be better than Trippier. But now we've got to look at our individual training, because Malo Gusto is going to need positioning work if he's going to fit in my tactical setup in the future. So let's go and have a look at our players very quickly. Is that an attribute that can be worked on? If we go to our training, probably want an outfield player as this example, an individual training focus, you can see defensive positioning is one of the areas which will work on positioning, as well as a couple of other attributes too. You've also got options for things such as crossing and shooting, which we'll get to a bit later. But I know that if I bring Malo Gusto in and get him working intensively on defensive positioning, he's probably going to use some of that remaining potential to improve the positioning attribute and bring that up to a manageable level for me and for a top level fullback. And that's something that we can now consider taking a gamble on. So it's helped us make a decision on a transfer from our scout reports rather than delaying and waiting for a perfect player or spending more money on scouting, which isn't always possible if you're at the lower levels. The only thing I would say now is that once you get that player in, get them working continuously on that 1 week attribute or attribute group that's holding them back. And if you do that as soon as they arrive, you should see that in time, you'll be able to reduce or completely eradicate the flaw from their game. Let's move on to our next step and talk about the complete opposite side of that, and players that either don't have a big weakness, as we saw with Lewis Miley a few moments ago, or are approaching their potential, but you just want to get that last little bit out of them, squeeze every drop out of their ability. In these instances, we may want to focus on creating or maximizing a strength. Rather than focusing on improving a weakness to get them up to playable level, why not focus on an existing standout attribute or something that's already solid and make it even stronger? Because that could make the difference to both the player and your team in the future. Let's go back to Football Manager and look at another example. So again, there are various reasons you can use this, and it's one of the reasons I set up Lewis Miley the way he did, where he didn't really have a huge weakness. But again, this will depend on the level of the game you're at as to what you choose to focus on here. So at the lower levels, let's take an example of my Bedford Town or my real saves, where I'm managing semi-pro sides, with pretty bloated fixture congestion due to the leagues they're in and the competitions they're in, having midfielders that have incredible stamina and natural fitness can actually mean I have to rotate less into weaker backup players who, at that level, are going to be really awful. So by taking a good attribute, such as endurance, you can see that Lewis Miley, his natural fitness is 15, his stamina's 12. They're perfectly fine with the rest of his game. But if we can turn that into, say, 17 and 14 or 17 and 15, we've got a player who will very rarely need to be rested. Now, at Newcastle's level, with the squad they've got, that's not going to be quite as essential, but the lower levels of the game could be absolutely key. And that's why endurance might be a priority here, despite not being a weakness in the player's game at all. If we look at another side of this, someone who's a bit older, Anthony Gordon, according to our coaches here, still has half of a start of potential ability to grow into and is making good progress in training. So he's not really got a standout weakness in those wide areas. He's got good technique, his movement is phenomenal, works hard, he's electric quick, he's a good crosser, he's a good dribbler, he's a decent finisher, he's got a good first touch. But why don't we make one of those attributes even more standout? So on this occasion, I might pick, I'm going to put Anthony Gordon over to the right-hand side because Newcastle have signed a couple of players who are better off the left. Maybe Harvey Barnes, maybe Anthony Elanga's going to go in there. So to put Gordon on the right, we might want him to focus on his crossing and become even better at that. Even though his attribute is already very good, one more on that front and we could turn him into a world superstar. Alternatively, you may want him cutting in off the left and think, well, his finishing attribute's good, but I'd like to make it even better. So let's instead work on the shooting side of the game and improve the finishing, the long shots and that work in front of goal. Now, of course, with only a little bit of potential ability left, you're not going to get too much more out of the player. But instead of that going towards general development, if we'd left it alone and a player just improving naturally across the board, we're actually going to try and maximise as much of that remaining potential ability to go on to the specific attribute we're working, which may mean that you get twice the amount out of that and maybe a little bit less out of jumping reach or out of marking, which just aren't as important to you for this player. So even those little things can be so important. The difference of a striker who scores 5 extra goals a year, someone who, particularly if you're outside the top level, you're likely to be a selling club at some point. If you can maximise their value by improving them so they're worth an extra 500 grand, an extra million, it can all make a big difference to your club. So often in football and in professional sport generally, the fine margins and the little details are often the used reasons for a difference between two players or two teams at any given moment. And by making your competent players even stronger in their best attributes and their best role, you could be having more of an impact than you think on the future of your save. For our final 2 points, we're going to change our tact a little bit here because while individual training is undoubtedly important for your players when they're trying to improve or fine-tune their game, it's not all about attribute progression, which is what we've largely discussed so far. With the new tactical features in FM26 in particular, we can have a larger impact on a player's competency in specific roles and positions than ever before. In many of the FM26 guides we've released so far, we've already mentioned that players are now able to become more competent in new positions more quickly, with the additional higher chance of becoming natural in a new role over time too. We can use that to our advantage in both of these final 2 points about individual training. Firstly, as we discussed with young players or new signings in our youth development guide before, individual position and role training can be brilliant to help someone adapt to your tactic. As we know, most teams will set up slightly differently in the footballing world, and therefore a new signing coming into your club may not just be joining a new team and trying to adapt to new surroundings, but also experiencing a change of formation, a change of role, or a change of tactical instructions from what they're used to too. So providing individual training for the exact position and roles you see a new or developing player fulfilling in your tactical setup can actually help them settle in quicker and, more importantly, produce more successful performances for your team. It's an area that's so often just delegated by football manager players, which does risk delaying progression to team cohesion, to dynamics and to individual performances. So that's why I put such a focus on it. And while it is great for young players that we talked about before, it can be a particularly useful trick to use on your new first team signings when they arrive at your club. Let's go over to FM very quickly and have a look at what we do with some of the new Newcastle signings. So this one's a little bit different because obviously you're new to a club, but let's move a couple of years into your career, you're settled in with your tactic and all of your current players are well trained in it, they're well versed in what you're doing. You've got a couple of new signings coming in. So let's go over to the tactic that's been set up for this club at the minute. So we've gone into Newcastle and we've set up a 4-3-3 with narrow inverted wingers. Now, this is going to be quite important at this football club because Newcastle United have got a lot of new players that are attacking in wide areas. Examples of that will include, say, Jacob Ramsey, Johan Visser. We've mentioned Anthony Elanga already. Harvey Barnes has only been there a couple of years. William Asula has only been there a couple of years. So there are lots of players that won't be completely versed on this setup yet. We're going to use the example though of Jacob Ramsey, and I think he's the best one because he can come in and can play as either a central midfielder, a number 10, or a left winger naturally. Now, he's been playing in various roles for Aston Villa, and he would imagine, even if you delegated this, your assistant is going to be choosing between natural roles and not necessarily pick the same one that you see them fulfilling regularly in your team in the future. So I've actually looked at Jacob Ramsey in this tactical setup and decided I see him as a left winger, despite the assistant telling me that his best position is actually as a number 10, as a second striker. So what we're going to do is go to the players' individual training and make sure that as a new signing, they're adapted to the new role we're going to want them to play as quickly as possible, which is actually going to be an inside winger, cutting in with the chance to shoot, to pass, as we've seen with their brilliant ability as a number 10, as well as being able to take on players too. So let's go over to the individual training, and you can see actually the current coaching team has them as a central midfielder and suggests that that's their strongest playing position, whereas we're now going to focus them to the attacking midfield left as an inside winger, and an out of possession role, we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to go to an attacker and we're going to go for them as a wide midfielder, because one of the things I'm going to be doing with this Newcastle team is out of possession, I'm going to be getting my midfielders to come back into a shape, and that's something that Ramsey isn't used to doing. As you saw from his attributes and from his positional screen, he wasn't actually used to being a left midfielder at all, and that's something in the future we're going to have to develop for the greater good of the team. So to get him to be a bit more stable and a bit more responsible defensively, something you hear commentators and pundits talk about all the time with wingers, will they support their fullback? Will they get back into the tactical shape? Well, we're going to have to train that into Jacob Ramsey, because playing off the left is a little bit newer for him, and we want him to adapt to our tactic. As a new signing, he'll get there in time. He's still got that potential ability to grow into, but the sooner we get him to work on it, the better it is for us. Now, just as we did with the attribute training a bit earlier on, let's finish by moving on to the reverse of the point we've just talked about. You may be signing or developing a player to be the perfect squad professional for you. A player with a great attitude that can cover loads of positions and be the perfect option for you to put on your bench most weeks and cover for injuries and whatever else. In an alternate example to this, you may even have a player whose attributes suit a completely different positional role to the one that they're natural in, particularly an issue this year with a lot of players being incredibly short and listed as centre halves. In these situations, why not use individual tactical training to make a player more versatile? As we've discussed already, we know that players are now learning new positions more quickly than ever and have a better chance of becoming natural in them. So why not use any remaining potential ability to help them master a new one? If you look at the most successful sides across the 21st century, there's normally always a few players that are ready to help across multiple positions when called upon. In English football, could you create, for example, the next John O'Shea, the next James Milner, maybe Federico Valverde, who we've seen in multiple positions at Real Madrid? The list goes on. It's not always about having the best 11 specialist players over the course of a season. With injuries, with suspensions, and with increasing fixture congestion in the modern football calendar, more versatile players can actually help any squad reach its goals more than ever before. At lower levels, it can also be a great way to avoid an extra signing or to help keep you under the wage bill. Combined with a strong character that can learn quickly and support the dressing room in other areas of the game, this can be an incredible individual training weapon in your Football Manager armoury. Let's go and take a quick look at an example of it. So for this purpose, we're going to use a couple of players at very different stages of their development, but both of them have still got potential to grow into. So back with Newcastle, we're going to have a look at two particular players. The first of them, we'll go for someone who we've not looked at yet, who's a little bit more experienced, and we're going to go for Joe Willock, who here is listed as only a centre midfielder. It's the only position he's accomplished or natural in. However, if we go to his profile, there are lots of others that he's either unconvincing or competent in, including both wide positions, number 10 or holding midfield. Now in my tactic, Joe Willock is a backup player. If he can only play one position off the bench, he's not going to be massively helpful to me in the future. Now, we could retrain him as a holding midfielder in our setup, but he's not really a natural playmaker type, and you can see that his traits are that he likes to go forward, get into the opposition area, etc. Now, we've decided that we're going to be playing two wide players as inverted wingers to try and get into the box and support Voltemada off flick-ons, etc. So having a player that likes to get on the ball in the centre of the park, get into the opposition area, and is good at dribbling, works hard, great moving off the ball, and not a bad finisher with plenty of pace, Joe Willock cutting in off that left or right hand side could be a very useful tool for us. He's still got half a star of potential ability to grow into, so let's try and shape that into where we want it. We're going to go to his individual training, and we're going to work him now off that inside left as an inverted winger. And again, the out of possession role was set up to be the same. It's another position that he can do as a wide midfielder. So now, Joe Willock, we are maximising his last little bit of potential to focus on someone who can be a threat in a second position for us. We're making him accomplished or potentially even natural with a few substitute appearances to help develop the role too. It'd be a really useful boost to the squad's versatility. The second example we're going to use, it's a little bit more of a specialist one, but again will improve the versatility of the squad. And we'll finish with our favourite Lewis Miley, who I mentioned this example in the youth development guide. He's a centre midfielder here, but given his physical attributes, doesn't really suit the two midfield roles I've got set up for Guimarães and for Joel Linton. But in the holding role where Sandro Tonali is, I could see him potentially becoming a star there. Now he's already natural in centre midfield, he can help us off the bench in both of the other two roles, but why not turn that accomplished defensive midfielder into a natural one and make him a specialist in three of the positions that we've got in our starting 11? And that's the reason we decided at the start to set him up as a defensive mid and a deep line playmaker, because actually that's where we see him in the future. But also, even if we then are wrong and we change our mind, he can then play all of the three midfield roles in our tactic naturally, rather than just two of them and then covering in another. Creating a specialist in an extra area at 19 gives us a versatile leader for the future, which combined with mentoring, combined with the other elements of youth development, could give us someone who can be the next player that leads this dressing room 10 years later. So that's just my general guide to individual training in FM26, including 5 ways that you can use it to support success for your players and club in the future. Of course, this one overlaps in more areas, so it's a little harder to have done in chronological order. And of course, there will be some parts that have been mentioned in other guides already. But I do hope you still found it useful nonetheless. Let me know if there's any other reason that you use individual training in Football Manager and which parts you prefer to control yourself in the game. If you did enjoy this guide or find it helpful though, please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. Plus, why not subscribe and turn that notification bell on for FM26 stories and more guides like this. If you've missed any of them, there is a whole playlist of the ones we've released so far up in the eye above. And if you want to see the detail regarding individual training in youth development, which we mentioned a few times earlier today, then why not click on this video to have a look now. Thanks for watching.